You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
J.T. Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Ford,
Corey Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mott,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Charlene Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is episode 600 with my guest Ian Garner. It's episode 600 of the Author Stories Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. This has been an amazing run these last going on 5 years now of the Author Stories Podcast, culminating today with episode 600. But don't worry, there are plenty more shows to come. We are booked solid through summer and booking more shows every day. Thank you all for tuning in to all the shows that we've done. Thank you to our sponsors who make the show possible, Patricia Gilliam and Richard Fox, specifically for this episode. I really appreciate their support. They are amazing authors, and they put their money where their mouth is when they support the writer community. Thank you for supporting this episode. Also to Dabble. Writing novels is hard. Dabble makes it easier. Dabble replaces your word processor doing what it can't. Dabble organizes your manuscript, story notes, and plot. It simplifies story, leaving more room in your brain to create. And after all, that's what being a writer is all about. Dabble was built from the ground up specifically for writing novels. It takes minutes to learn, and it makes writing a joy. See how Dabble will revolutionize the way you write with a free trial at www.dabblewriter.com. Being episode 600, I thought I would invite one of my very best friends in the whole world and my son, Ian Garner, to share a little celebration with me and to talk about writing, how he sees it. And Ian also brings an interesting perspective to the show because he is an educator teaching English to young students. And I thought it'd be a great thing to get him to tell us about how he sees the future of writing and what we as non-educators could do to help shape the next generation of writers. So I hope you enjoy this episode, and stay tuned, there's lots more to come. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today I'm super excited to have joining me for episode 600, the one and only Ian Garner. Welcome to the show, Ian.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for joining me. I thought this would be fun we've never done an actual episode of Author Stories together. And, I thought it'd be fun to celebrate 600 and talk about some stuff that we don't get to talk about all the time.
This is true, and I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. So before we get started, you have several stories available on Amazon and on Audible. Why don't you give us a rundown of what you have available? But before we do that, people would be let down if we didn't open the show the way we always open the show, and that's with the same question: what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
Well, I was thinking about this earlier, and the more I think about it, I don't know that there's any one particular memory. I think it's a cluster of 2 or 3 smaller memories. I can probably pinpoint the earliest point was when I was playing Spyro at like 3 years old on the original PlayStation. And I remember, you look back on it now as a 23-year-old, and I was playing the remastered version, and you think, well, this story is pretty simple. But to a 3-year-old, this was the heaviest stuff I'd ever heard of. I was like, this is awesome. You got this whole kingdom of dragons that get frozen by this evil goblin dude, and then your whole motivation is to save everyone. Like, you're the epic hero of the story. And I ate that stuff up. It was great. I was in control of the story. I got to be the hero. It was just super easy to get into. And then, probably the second memory is probably watching Sword and Stone on VHS back when that was a thing at like age 5. And I remember falling in love with the Arthurian legends pretty much immediately. You've got this old crazy guy who does magic, and who doesn't love that? you've got this awkward, skinny kid who doesn't know who he is or what he's supposed to do in his life. And I think all of us can relate to that at some point or another. And then you realize that this kid is destined to become the greatest king England's ever known. And I'm like, that's the kind of story I want to tell. That's something that everyone can relate to. That's what makes it a good story, is if you can put yourself into that story and see yourself, that's fantastic storytelling. So I'm like, that's what I want to do when I grow up. So, yeah, hopefully that answers the question.
You tend to be drawn to big epic stories, ones that are... Hello? Hello? Are you there? Are you there?
Yeah, you were muted, it said.
Yes, I was.
Yeah.
You tend to be drawn toward big epic stories that are... what would be a good descriptor? Stories that are legendary in scope. Why do you think you resonate with those kinds of stories? Maybe more so than very close narratives that are very singularly focused.
I think it's a lot to do with how mundane some of those close stories can be. I work 8 hours a day. I come home, I play with my dog, and I watch Netflix, and I do homework. I don't really want to write a story or read a story about a kid that goes to work and then comes home to play with his dog, because I live that life. I do not, however, get to go marching into battle with a sword in my right hand and a fireball in my left hand and kill dragons. So if reading is about adventure and escapism, I need something exciting to escape into. And when you have epic fantasy or even urban fantasy, these huge legendary fight scenes and battle scenes and acts of valor and betrayal and deceit and honor and integrity, that's something I can just fall down a rabbit hole into, because I don't get that in my everyday life. I don't have any magic powers, and I don't get to fight werewolves. But when I'm reading something like that, like the Dresden Files or Lord of the Rings or Iron Druid Chronicles, I get to escape into the things that I really, really want to do in my life that are just physically impossible.
What do you think about those kinds of legendary stories and mythical stories? Why do you think that those connect with us so much, other than just the escape into a world that's bigger and more exciting than ours? Why do you think that those kinds of stories are so beloved by so many people?
I think we all want to be the hero of our own story. I don't think anyone particularly loves the idea of going to a 9-to-5, coming home, eating a microwave dinner, and retiring at 60. I don't think anyone wakes up and says, man, I really want to do that. What we want is to be challenged. We want to be afraid. We want to prove how brave we are. We want to love fiercely and grieve deeply. We want to fight bravely. We want to be everything that we possibly can be. And stories like that allow us to do that, even if it's just in our heads for a little while. And hopefully, with some inspiration from those stories, we too can achieve that kind of life. You can read David and Goliath stories all the time, and you're never going to fight a literal giant unless you go to, Scandinavia or something. But you get to a bar fight. But,
or North Carolina, where Paul Drent is.
Exactly. But it can give us the equipment we need to do those things metaphorically, whether it's quitting a job that we hate, or if it's asking out that girl that we've been too afraid to ask out for 6 months, stuff like that. It empowers us, and it emboldens us, and it gives us food for thought, and it allows us to think about all the things that we want to do but aren't sure how to make happen. So I think that has a lot.
Well, and for those of us that did ask that girl out 25 years ago, we get to keep reliving those things.
This is true. This is very true.
Yeah. Describe your writing style and the types of stories that you imagine to us. You've got a number of stories on Amazon: American Son, Roswell Whispers, The Brotherhood, in Kindle edition and several audios. And I know you've got stories in, several stories in, Tales from the Canyons of the Damned, and then also, Steve Bowyer's Superhero and Vile Villains collection. If you had to sum up your style, how would you describe it to someone?
Sarcastic and macabre, I think. I feel like I have this unique voice that's Butcher-esque, perhaps, but I like to put my own personality in there. American Son I wrote because I was a nerd in high school with it was just a scrawny little guy who could not bench 100, probably, but I wanted to be Jason Bourne, because who doesn't? So I was like, I'm going to write a story in which there's an awkward skinny guy who has very poor social skills, is faced with a terrorist threat. He says, screw it, I'm going to take care of this. And it's a fun story. It's kind of intense in a few places, but I try to put as much of my own humor in there as I could just to break the tension. It was just a fun exercise for me because it allowed me to exercise what my voice was, what I wanted to do. It let me play with some of the creepy, more thriller elements. There's a twist at the end, which I'm pretty proud of. It's just a fun little intro story that I wrote. Brotherhood, I wrote for Daniel Smith's Tales from the Canyons of the Damned, and that one, I had the idea of it while I was asleep, and I woke up and I was like, okay, what if there was a paratrooper unit in World War II that turned into werewolves? I'm like, okay, so at 2 a.m. I turn on my phone and I write it down in a little notes app, and I fall back asleep. The next day I'm like, I'm really glad I wrote that down because I don't remember anything from last night. But I emailed Daniel and said, hey, I have a pitch for you if you have an opening. And he's like, all right, cool. And that one, I got to play more with the darker side, I think. It wasn't so much sarcastic. It was just an earnest, intense story where you have this guy who essentially loses everything when the Nazis bomb London. His brother had already joined the British Air Force a year or so prior. And because this kid has nothing else to lose, he's going to follow in his brother's footsteps. And without giving away the ending, he does meet his brother again, but it's not in quite the way that you would think. And I played with some foreshadowing in that just to see how well I can do that. And I think it turned out pretty well by the end. It's a fun story. And finally, let's see, which one was that one? Redemption. I did that one for Steve Bowyer's supervillain anthology, I guess a summer or two back. And that one I just really wanted to have fun with. He's like, hey, I'm taking stories from the perspective of supervillains, ham it up. And I was like, all right. So I'm a sucker for redemption stories. That's just my thing. I love a character who messes up and does horrible things, realizes he's done horrible things, and does his best to make it right. Because I feel like every single person on this planet can relate to someone making a mistake and wanting to make that right. Unless you're just cold, in which case I'll hug you or something. But I just had a lot of fun with that story. The protagonist is a supervillain who can manipulate gravity, and that one was really fun because it gave me an excuse to research what all you can do by manipulating gravity. I was like, okay, well, technically I should be able to make things heavier or lighter, and I should be able to create black holes at will. So I'm going to put all of that in there. And then I was like, what's the natural antithesis of gravity? And I'm like, how do I make a guy that this guy has to fight and make it believable? I'm like, well, he can control beams of light. So that was a fun exercise of trying to study up on how gravity affects light. So I've learned a lot in the writing of that story, more than any high school physics class taught me regarding how gravity and light work with each other. It was a really fun exercise, though. I made the guy who manipulates light super corny and campy just because I felt like it just worked, you know? Looking back, it's kind of goofy, but I love that character probably more than any I've ever written, to be honest with you. It's so goofy. I love it. And the ending of the story definitely lives up to its name. I won't tell you how, but it's probably one of the most satisfying endings I've ever written. So, to tie it all up, sarcastic, goofy, definitely a little macabre. Read the end of Brotherhood and you'll understand why. Highly recommend.
For sure. The last couple of years, your writing output has been turned toward the academic side, as you've been wrapping up a master's degree that you're going to wrap up here in just a couple weeks, I think.
At the end of summer.
Right, and you have you've been teaching school this year. I have. On this show, I mean, this is episode 600. We've done 600 of these shows, and one thing that comes up over and over and over in the show is the a lot of people. I dare mention a percentage, but it's a high percentage of people that I've talked to. Talk about, and we always talk about these early memories because those early influences, tend to really stick with you. But in the same way, early encouragement sticks with you. And I've heard story after story after story of, an adult, an educator or a parent, a lot of times an educator, notices something in a kid and gives them some piece of encouragement, and to the adult, to the educator, a lot of times I'll bet it's just a throwaway line. Hey, you're really good at this. You should continue this, or, writes a comment on a paper, or, takes a paper that a kid wrote and finds a way, to get them to submit that to a contest or something. I know you had an experience like that in high school. And you went on to win, a competition and, went to Eudora Welty's home and all of that kind of stuff. And you can tell more of that if you want to. But, but I hear that over and over again that that in the dark days of when a creative person is not feeling creative, and when the work is hard, a lot of times those little pieces of encouragement come back. And I'm Facebook friends with one of my high school English teachers, and I vividly remember in her honors English class when I was in high school that we read Beowulf, and in the midst of our discussion of that, I could see myself writing, some epic fantasy thing like that. And in that moment, I saw myself as a storyteller for maybe the first time. And I've shared that story with her, and she mentioned it on Facebook the other day. And she remembered teaching Beowulf, but she didn't remember that situation. But it meant something to me. And can you talk about the other side of that, of being an educator, and how difficult is it? What do you see from being on the other side of the desk or the lectern when you're trying to instill something in these kids? Do you notice things in them? Do you wish that you noticed something? What are you allowed to do? Can you just kind of talk about that from an educator's perspective?
Sure. I will say that I don't have as many of those reactions as I would like, although I've had 2 or 3 that I definitely remember, and I don't know that I'll be able to forget those anytime soon. Granted, it is my first year teaching, so it's still fresh in my mind, but I'll go into it as best as I can. The first one was in September. I was just learning the ropes and trying to figure out how to deal with 70 11-year-olds at the same time, which is still a daunting task some days, but I love them though. We were going over. Go ahead.
Yeah, so you're one of 5 siblings. It's probably not a lot different than just an afternoon
it's
at your
really
house.
Not. It's really not. Yeah. But it was September, and we were going over narrative writing, and I was basically just giving them a step-by-step of how to build a good story, how you need to have a good setting, how you need to center it all around a theme. You need to have a couple of characters that everyone can relate to, that you can pour a little of yourself into, or someone you like or dislike. give these characters some emotion, give your audience something to connect to. You need to give them a conflict. There's some sort of obstacle that they need to overcome, and ultimately you need a resolution. That way you can wrap the story up at the end and say that you have confronted that conflict, you've overcome it somehow, or you haven't. And what's the fallout of failing in that task? And I could tell right off the bat that a couple of these kids were getting it, but a couple of them just were not having it. So I'm trying to break it down for them in detail and just hash over it over and over. And there was this one girl, she's been quiet the entire school year, and up to that point, we'd been in school for like a month and a half. She never said anything. She never really raised her hand to ask a question. But I could tell that the more I went over it, I could see the little light in her eyes getting brighter and brighter. And I only told them to write like 3 paragraphs to start. I was like, just give me some basic info about the setting. You can introduce the characters. Just wrap it up super short and sweet. And over time, we'll develop lengthier, more in-depth stories. And I worked with her one-on-one for a little bit while I had everyone else writing. And she's like, okay, well, here's what I want to write the story about. And here's who I want to put in there. And they're gonna like go to the basketball court, and one of the characters is going to lose his ball in a ditch across the street, and this old guy who yells at him all the time is going to help him get the ball out or something like that. And she's like, Mr. Garner, I don't really know how to do this. I was like, I'll be honest with you. The very first person to tell a story probably didn't know how to do it either. You just kind of have to do it. And if you like how it turns out, you can keep it that way, or if you feel like you could make it stronger, you could just erase it and you could just add more of something. And if you need help, I'm happy to do so. And I gave him like 20 minutes to work on it, and I was just floating around. And by the end of the 20 minutes, most of the kids had turned in exactly 3 paragraphs like I asked. Several of them only turned in 1 paragraph, which I've come to expect for most of this year. And the one girl I worked with over and over again, she had like 7 paragraphs turned in, front and back page. I was like, oh, okay. And it was rife with spelling errors and no quotation marks. But the story that she was telling, she knew exactly what she was doing. And I was very impressed. And I was like, how are you sure you've never done this before? She's like, no, I've never really done this, but I've always wanted to. No one's ever told me how to, though. I was like, oh, well, we're going to be doing a lot more of this, so I look forward to reading what you have. And consistently, every other week we do a narrative, and she never fails to impress me. So, knowing that it's the 6th grade and these kids don't really know how to do that is a little discouraging, because I feel like there's so much time spent on memorizing facts for standardized tests that we have kind of lost what it means to be creative, what it means to tell a story, the importance of it. We put that stuff on the back burner because while there is a writing component to the state test, it doesn't count nearly as much as the multiple choice section. I think the writing section is only worth like 12 points, which in the grand scheme of things is not much, especially when school funding is on the line. So all of our focus is being put on memorizing what a gerund is or where to put quotation marks, which are all important things to know, but there's more to it than that. I really want to be able to continue to put the spark in these kids like I did with that one student. I'll attest to something that happened just this week, actually. Mondays are always rough. The kids come back from the weekend. They're invigorated because they've been playing Fortnite for the past 48 hours straight, and they're hopped up on Mountain Dew, and they haven't seen their friends in 2 whole days, and you would think that they hadn't seen each other in a lifetime. So they're all chipper and happy and all that stuff. But they're still good kids. It was my last class of the day, and there's this one kid who does not speak ever. Not since August, not up till now. And I know he's doing his work. I know he's paying attention because he always turns in his work, and he does well on it. But he's always suffered with the writing part. And I had just taught a lesson where I was given this article on light ships, and it's not exactly the most dynamic reading material that I'm given to work with. It's nowhere near the scope of Rowling or Tolkien or anyone like that. It's just what I have to work with. But we made the best of it. It's basically an article on the history of lightships and what their purpose is and what they're doing. And at the end of a unit, after we answer all the questions that we were given and all that stuff, I gave them a short assignment for the rest of the class period. We had like 30 more minutes in class. I said, okay, what I want you to do is I want you to write me a 5-paragraph narrative. And I want you to do it from the perspective of a captain of a lightship in the middle of a storm. I want you to write to me exactly how you would handle that situation if you were that captain. So I was like, I'm not going to put any kind of limitation on you. You can make it as funny as you want, as scary as you want, as sad as you want. I'm giving you full creative control over this thing. So just wow me. And that kid who never talks wrote this episode of 24. That is probably the best thing I have ever seen. Like, he starts it, it's 7 p.m. Jack Donaldson is at the wheel. and it just goes down like 7 p.m., 9 p.m., 2 a.m. The sun is rising. It's 5:30. The storm is over. We have survived. And it is probably the single greatest thing that kid has ever written in my class. And I was like, how did you do that, kid? And he was like, I don't know. You were talking about cool stuff that you've read, and I just wanted to try that. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, glad I was able to help. So, it all boils down to, I guess, I wish we had more time to focus on writing, because seeing how these kids open up and figure out who they are and what they want to do, I wish we had more time to do that, because, again, while the things that we are teaching is incredibly important as for an understanding of the English language and how it works, there's more to life than just reciting facts. I want to be able to think freely and to create things. I think we're all wanting to be creative in our own way. I think we each want the agency to make our own versions of the world the way we were created, in a way. And I'm probably getting way too deep into this, but we all are creators, and we need to remind the kids of this generation who will be running this planet very soon,
right.
But they're free to do so as well. Otherwise, we're going to have a little bit of a problem.
Well, to that point, I think a lot of people, because they don't quite understand what's actually going on at school and what teachers have to work with, and it's easy to assume that the school system and the educators are going to convey everything that we want our kids to know and learn. And the realities of that is that there's just not enough time. There's not enough resources. There's standardized testing that has to be, that is above all else. What can we do as parents and people that, spend the other half of the day with our kids? What can we be doing to instill that sense of creativity in them and to challenge them in ways that kids are not being challenged right now?
Read to your children, for the love of God. Please do that. I cannot stress that enough. We have data at work that show that kids who read with their parents an hour a day versus kids who don't score significantly higher on not only English tests, but mathematics, science, history. Reading is way more important than we give it credit for. If your kid wants to go to the library, take them to the library. And video games are fine, and the playground's fine, but if your kid wants to read, make sure he or she is reading. Read with them. If you develop a bond with your child by reading, they're going to associate reading with positive memories. It's going to encourage them to read in the future. Whereas if you discourage that child from reading, they're going to develop negative memories associated with it, so they're less likely to read in the future. Most of the students I teach, they don't have anyone that reads to them when they go home. Now, I have 4 or 5 students who devour entire books within a week, and I'm very impressed with them, and their scores certainly reflect it in my class. It all boils down to being involved with what your kid wants to read, what kind of stories they're into. If your kid wants to read Dr. Seuss, then, go buy all the Dr. Seuss books. If your kid really wants to read Stephen King, maybe, sit down and say, okay, well, this one's a little too mature for you, or this one you maybe not quite ready for yet. But if you feel like you're ready for it, we'll go over it together. And if you don't understand something, I'm there to help you with it. Just be a supportive co-reader with your child in those situations. Just encourage the kids to read. That's the one thing I can definitely attest to. It's not even just reading. There are lots of arguments saying that television is horrible for creativity, and I kind of have to disagree to a certain extent. Obviously there's just some garbage on TV that just doesn't need to be even mentioned. I'm looking at you, Nickelodeon. But if your kid wants to watch Lord of the Rings, let them watch Lord of the Rings. If your kid wants to watch Narnia, if your kid wants to watch, well, maybe not Game of Thrones, is probably pushing it, but if your kid wants to watch something, especially if it's based off of a popular book series or a novelization, let that kid do that, because while they won't be getting the full story from the TV or movie medium, they're getting more of it than they would have, especially if they don't even have the book. I'll even go so far as to say video games. And I know I'll probably have some folks who disagree with me on that. I will say stuff like Call of Duty or Fortnite, that you can just throw that out. You can say that the campaign missions in some of those games are maybe good storytelling, but I can't really attest to Fortnite other than that 1-2 times I played it. But if you want your kids to be involved in storytelling and reading while they're playing a game, get them something story-based. Get them something like Skyrim. Get them Red Dead Redemption, Red Dead Redemption 2. Get them God of War. Now, of course, make sure that your kids are old enough to play these games. I don't want a 6-year-old playing God of War. That's just going to traumatize the poor kid. But if your kid's a teenager and he's emotionally mature enough to handle that, there's a lot of stuff in those games that can be very helpful. You can play Skyrim, where you're the stereotypical chosen one, where you were destined to overcome this great evil, and along the way you can choose, do I want to do it this way? Do I want to join this faction where I can turn to a werewolf? Or do I want to be a vampire and just like suck the blood out of all of my enemies? Or do I want to be, do I want to be the top wizard in the entire country? Or do I just want to be a sneaking little thief that pickpockets everyone on my way to the top? And every avenue that you choose gives you different options to explore, and it helps you build your own character. And I think it's one of the greatest writing exercises you can possibly do, especially if you're wanting to work on character development, because as you play this game, you have to decide your character's emotions in certain situations. It leans heavily on role-playing game mechanics. Now, you can argue that Skyrim has kind of veered away from that compared to previous installments and other games, but the sentiment is still there. It's all about building a character. It's about figuring out who you are in this strange world. What is your place in the world? What is your purpose? And if you're a kid who's wanting to explore how to write good characters, this is a fantastic way to do it. God of War, the newest installment. Yep.
No, go ahead. God of War.
God of War is the newest installment, anyway. Fantastic story if you want to work on relationships. We follow Kratos, who is the God of War. He does not know how to be a father. He just doesn't quite get it. He wants to be able to show affection, but over the past however many years, he's been nothing but a bloodthirsty slaughtering machine. So now he has this kid, and his wife is now dead, and he's the sole provider. The nurturing side of the equation is gone. Lear's having to learn how he has to be stoic and protect his son from Draugr and the undead and dragons and other gods. But he also has to learn to be more understanding. He has to learn how to be softer with his tone. He needs to know when to not yell and when to sit his son down instead of disciplining him over the knee. If you want to learn how to build relationships between a couple of characters, that's the game you need to play. Because if you don't quite know how to make one character interact with another, your story isn't going to be sold very well. And if you want to, even learn how to handle some things in real life, it's a good way to look at things. If you react with anger, you're going to fuel more controversy and more conflict. Whereas if you take a step back, breathe a minute, and look at the situation objectively, you're like, okay, well, I understand how to do this better, and you'll save yourself the trouble of your son being kidnapped by a troll. Stuff like that.
Well, one of my favorite books of last year was "Make Me No Grave" by Hayley Stone. And she was on the show, and I asked her, I said, how long have you been a fan of, Western literature and stuff like that? And she said, kind of sheepishly at first, she's like, well, since I played Red Dead Redemption, and, and we started talking about how that video game inspired, her to think in a new way, and then, to then go dig into everything she could find and kind of, became a fan of the genre. But it was that video game and the character development and the new landscape, literally and metaphorically, to start thinking of stories in. And, I think that the stuff that we have so easily dismissed, I think there's a lot of, good fodder there for story if we, open our minds up to it a little bit. And, and I used to kind of agree that, that movies and things like that could be stifling for creativity, or, if you take just about any book and cram that into an hour and a half or 2 hour movie, there's so much you're going to lose. But we're kind of in this golden age of television right now where, directors and producers and actors can take time and really unfold these characters and really show character development. And I'm with you on there that I think as writers that's it's a good thing to study some of the TV shows that are really done well, where they really take their time. I think it's a good thing for writers.
I think there's a lot of potential there. I think, again, you have to be cautious with what you're using. There's some stuff that's just more fluff, but look at Game of Thrones. It has forever changed television as we know it. I don't think we're ever going to go back from what we are now, where we're at now. And I think as writers, we'd be foolish not to utilize the resources that we have at hand. It's just we are privileged to live in the century that we are living in. We have so many tools at our disposal now that we need to be careful not to ignore them all.
Well, and for so long we thought of a television adaptation as a knockoff of the source material, and yes. I think that I think we can learn a lot from the way things are going on television and bring that into our writing. I don't believe that writers are competing with other writers for the attentions of people. I think we're competing with HBO. We're competing with Netflix, YouTube, Facebook, God forbid. But that's where the competition is. And if we see that people are doing something well over here, we would do well to take some cues and maybe alter our writing, in a way to keep up with what people's expectations are. I don't think that's a bad thing.
Oh no, the truth is they're doing something right. We do well to learn from it.
Yeah, for sure. What is, you mentioned Game of Thrones a couple times. What other, things do you think are being done well right now?
As of right now, I'm mostly looking forward to the Amazon, remake of Lord of the Rings. When I first heard that they were going to be doing that, I was immediately skeptical because I didn't think enough time had passed for that to warrant a remake. But then I thought about it, I was like, well, it's 2019. Return of the King came out in 2003. It's been 16 years, meaning it's been about 20 years since Fellowship came out. And I was like, oh, I'm not a child anymore. Oh, okay. And then I was thinking about it. I said, well, Game of Thrones is taking essentially a chapter or two of the books at a time and televising them. It could be so bold to say maybe 5 chapters per episode because of the different viewpoints of characters that bounce around. And it's working. If you did this in a 3-hour movie, one book per 3 hours, it's just not, you're going to miss so much. Now, you could argue that in doing so, they kind of fluff it up a little too much. Sometimes they kind of don't really know what to do, so they'll throw in a gratuitous head removal scene or something like that. But the point is, they have a lot of time to tell the story that deserves to be told. Now, Martin has 1,000 pages in each book, give or take a few dozen. He knows exactly what he's doing with the story, and that's probably why. Well, I like to think he does. I guess time will tell when he finishes the next books, but I'm the optimist in the situation. So if Game of Thrones can do something so well with their television adaptation, Lord of the Rings deserves that same respect, if not more, in my opinion. Peter Jackson did phenomenal work with the original trilogy. That's one of the best movie series I've ever seen. But I distinctly remember reading those books at a young age, and I'm thinking, well, why didn't this happen? Or why? Yeah. I wish they had shown this. And I understand that when you already have a 3-hour movie, you just got to leave some stuff on the cutting room floor. But with Amazon's doing the series, we have so much potential to learn all about the Silmarillion. Tom Bombadil could show up, and we can finally get that happen on screen. We could see the scouring of the Shire. We could see Saruman go down the way he's supposed to go down. And while I am hesitant to accept a new cast and a new crew and different locales, because I grew up with these familiar faces and these familiar scenes, I am excited to see more of the story being told the way Tolkien intended it to be told. So I'm looking forward to that.
How long do you think it is before we see a Harry Potter series?
I don't know.
It's going to happen.
I know it will happen, but that 7th and 8th movie came out almost 10 years ago, so I'm going to give it another 10 years, I think. And the way Rowling has this habit of not being quite able to let go, I'm almost certain that within the next decade she's going to strike a deal where she's going to put all the things that she really wants to put in there in that series. All the Pottermore lore that we get, all the history of the founders of Hogwarts. We'll probably get Grindelwald tying in with, I want to call him Newt Gingrich. Why do I want to call him Newt Scamander? Tales of Beetle the Bard, all this stuff that was offhandedly mentioned or kind of got a spinoff. I'd like to see all of that in the same universe, in the same flow. I think that would benefit very well. And just give it 5 to 10 years, tops.
I think so too. I think it's a good age for seeing the things that we've loved in books, to get a good visual representation of that. It's also a great time for books right now. There's lots of great stuff out there. People doing new things. The weird thing is that people are always worried that TV and movies and all that are going to cannibalize traditional storytelling, and I think it just inspires it more and more.
I agree. Yeah.
And hopefully we'll have enough fodder for 600 more shows with new books coming out and new people doing their thing. Something
tells me you're not going to run out of people to talk to in the next 40 years.
No, we're already booked through summer of this year, and we did 252 shows last year, and we're
no pressure. Not the bad.
No, it's it just means you have a lot of sleep to catch up on. But sure. we're right on schedule to do the same this year or more. There's lots of good stuff coming. We'd like to thank all the folks who have sponsored the show and who make it possible, and a special shout out to Richard Fox and Patricia Gillum for this episode, for So you're finishing your master's degree this summer. What are you going to continue to do?
Well, I'm not entirely sure which avenue to take. I know if I want to teach at a university level, I'm going to need 18 more credit hours of English literature. So I could take a couple of more semesters while I'm teaching full-time, and by this time next year, I'll have a master's and the credits where I could teach dual enrollment courses while teaching high school, or just make a transition to a community college if I want to. Or, because I've already made it this far, I'm considering applying for a PhD program. Again, not really sure what to do with that. I don't really know just yet what exactly get it in. I'm still a little fuzzy on how all that works, but I really like the ring of Dr. Garner. So if I could be a doctor before I'm like 26, that'd be great.
Does the tweed jacket come with that, or is that a separate purchase?
No, but I've already got one picked out. I've got my eye on one. I've already got the pipe. I need one of those little golf caps, and I'll be in the money.
So the pipe, does this make you feel more creative?
It makes me feel. Yeah, I'll say that. Yeah. I was writing the other night, and I lit one up, and I was like, this is the way it's supposed to be done. Granted, I don't have a typewriter like Hemingway, but I'll take this laptop and I'll make the best with that. It's all right. It's different. It's new, but it's my thing now. So
I hear you. Well, Ian, thanks for joining me for episode 600. It's fun to catch up. We don't live together anymore, so we have to do Skype. Look forward to seeing what you're going to publish when you get the school thing behind you. If you would like to leave anybody leave our listeners with anything at the end, is there a piece of encouragement you would like to give people?
This too shall pass. Whatever it is that you need to get through. I've been having that in the back of my head for the past couple of weeks. I'm in the last 9 weeks of school. Testing is nigh. The kids are ready to go out for summer. But you got this. If you can just keep going and remember that not all the negative things last forever, that there is a light at the end of a tunnel. There is a pot of gold at the end of a rainbow. Whatever cliche you want to use to get you through the day, use it. It might seem difficult now, but it gets better. Don't worry about it.
Excellent. Ian, thank you so much. I'm going to put a link to your Amazon page in the show notes.
Awesome.
And thanks for dropping by to celebrate 600 with me.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. For more great author interviews like this one, go to hankgarner.com and dig through the archives. There's something there I know you'll love. Now stay tuned for a special audio clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
Hello, young one. What ghoulish tale of horror shall we explore tonight? Shall we watch The Creep Show? The Nightmare on Elm Street? Child of the night, give me your answer.
Which one would Mom kill us for watching? Said Buddy. Dad grinned and his eyes grew wide.
Which do you think, child of the jackal?
The Omen!
And we might have time for Omen too, if we hurry. She'll be home by 11.
I'll be back. Buddy ran to his room. He stripped down to his Yoda underwear and fished in the closet. 2 minutes later, he snuck back into the living room wearing his skeleton costume from last Halloween. He crept up behind his dad, who was cueing the movie. But David Rittermeyer was too clever for that. He spun around at the last moment and bared fanged teeth torn from paper plates, drawing a yip of surprise and a cry of, "No fair!" Daddy kicked off his Reeboks, plopped his smelly gym socks on the coffee table, another thing that Mom would hate, and killed the lights. The scary intro music began. The screen showed the silhouette of a boy, about Buddy's age. His shadow was a long, creepy cross. The Antichrist, the son of the devil. born of a jackal on a night of astrological portent, destined to bring about the end times and the final battle of good versus evil. Buddy sipped Sunkist and scooted up next to his dad. As the movie got scarier, he slipped an arm through his father's and cupped his big bicep. Buddy could feel his father's pulse. Dads get scared too. They flinched together, shouted together, pointed at the screen and covered their faces together. Buddy pressed his eyes to Daddy's shoulder just before the on-screen maid shouted, "It's all for you, Damien!" and dove from the roof, hanging herself. Buddy knew which parts he was old enough to watch and which parts he wasn't. He trusted his dad to let him know when to look again. Occasionally, his dad tricked him into peeking too soon, but that was part of the fun. They kicked their feet at the screen and shouted, "Look up! Look up! Oh, idiot! Don't get yourself killed!" At the climax, the hero of the movie, Mr. Thorne, discovered a birthmark of 3 6s on his son's head and dragged the little Antichrist to the altar of the church, determined to spear his son with holy daggers and end evil forever. After it was over, the Rittermeyer men sat silently through the credits. David put an arm around his son and ran his fingers through Buddy's hair. He wasn't searching for devil marks. He knew there weren't any. And Buddy was certain there were no daggers in his father's hand either. Those things were just make-believe. Real fathers and sons don't do bad things to each other. They were queuing up Omen 2 when the power went out. "No," Buddy whined. "Not on movie night." Daddy went to the window. "It's the whole block. Sorry, Damien. How about, scary blackout. Go get the Ouija board out of the guest room closet." "Cool. And candles." Buddy found the Ouija board, hidden under old clothes. When he shut the sliding door again, the sight of a monster startled him, and he let out an involuntary, "huh" sound. It was his own skeleton-bodied reflection in the mirrored closet door. He stared at it. He liked the effect of moonlight on his cheeks. Spectral, haunted, his eyes big and white. He clacked his teeth at himself, picturing his own grinning skull under his child's flesh, and gave an evil laugh. He was answered by a scream. A woman's scream. High-pitched and far away. One of the neighbors? Buddy dropped the Ouija board into a patch of moonlight and sat with it. "What's going on?" he whispered, his fingers on the heart-shaped wood planchette.
Flesh, Blood, Steel, the new book from David Allen Jones. 16-year-old Jake Harris wakes up after a horrific car accident to find 13 years have come and gone. He is 29 years old, a cyborg, and one of the world's most feared assassins. Horrified by the things he's done, things he can't remember, Jake vows never to kill again. Unfortunately, the company that owns Jake has other plans. They're not about to lose their top hitman to the errant memories of his teenage self. When Jake manages to escape them, they launch a worldwide manhunt that ranges from a near-future New York City to Paris. Desperate to remain himself, Jake joins a rebel faction dedicated to wresting control of the world's governments from the hands of militarized corporations. Using his enhanced body and perceptions, he is able to aid them in their fight. But Jake doesn't realize the rebels have their own plans for him, ones that involve unleashing his unique talents on their enemies. Faced with a dark past he can't recall and uncertain whom he should trust, Jake must come to terms with the sinister choices that molded him into the man he became. The question is, can he avoid doing it all again? Assassins aren't born, they're programmed. Flesh, Blood, Steel by David Allen Jones.